Fuck CP, ain't no name on it. Nigga, get the ball play and get the action. Let's go, why you got it? Change it now.
I've been reading, I've been listening, and it's a lot of people that have been commenting, a lot of text messages I've been receiving that saying, hey, Perk, stop it now. You know CP3 ain't no saint. And these were people that actually shared a locker room with CP3.
Kendrick Perkins just pulled back the curtain on what was really happening between Chris Paul and Ty Lue, and it completely changes how the Clippers' story looks. What first felt like a shocking, disrespectful 3 a.m. dismissal suddenly makes a lot more sense once you hear what Perk revealed on the Road Trippin' podcast. Here's how it played out. Chris Paul gets sent home by the Clippers in the middle of the night. He posts on Instagram around 3 a.m., saying he just found out and implying the decision came out of nowhere. The NBA world immediately rallies around him. The narrative becomes simple. Poor CP3. A future Hall of Famer disrespected by an ungrateful organization. Then Kendrick Perkins shows up on Road Trippin' with Richard Jefferson and Channing Frye and tells everyone to slow down. Perk starts by making one thing clear. He still believes Lawrence Frank needs to go, and is not defending the Clippers front office. But then he adds a line that flips the entire story on its head. Chris Paul, according to Perkins, is not a saint in this situation, and Perk doesn't leave it as a vague shot. He goes further. His words paint a very specific picture of what was happening behind the scenes, hinting that tensions had been building long before that late-night decision. Suddenly, the idea that this came out of nowhere doesn't hold up the same way. What looked like a cold, random move starts to feel like the final straw in a relationship that had already been breaking down.
It was stuff that kept building up throughout the course of the season. He was doing stuff behind T. Lue's back, going to players, whispering, saying things, and causing turmoil when the team is already struggling and going through a lot.
That's serious, because we're talking about a guy who was brought in to be a veteran leader, a stabilizing presence, an extension of the coaching staff, and instead, according to Perkins, he was doing the exact opposite. Perk framed it perfectly when he said, "The last thing you need is someone who's supposed to be helping the coach becoming a negative voice in the locker room." That line matters, because it cuts straight to the role Chris Paul was expected to play. He wasn't just another rotation player. He was supposed to reinforce the message, not undermine it, and Perkins didn't stop at general criticism. He backed it up with a specific story that explains how things went off the rails. During a game where the Clippers had blown a big lead, Jeff Van Gundy, serving as the team's defensive coordinator, called a timeout. In the huddle, Van Gundy gave a young player a clear defensive assignment, spelling out exactly what he needed to do on the next possession. The huddle breaks. Players start walking back onto the floor. And that's when Chris Paul steps in. According to Perkins, Paul walks over to that same young player and tells him to do something completely different, the opposite of what Van Gundy had just said. In that moment, Paul wasn't reinforcing the coaching staff's direction. He was overriding it. Perkins put it bluntly. When a veteran does that, he's not leading as sabotaging.
They break out of the timeout. Chris Paul goes to the young fella and tell him, no, you need to do this. He does what Chris Paul tells him to do, and he get his ass cooked. And those are the things that you cannot do. We all know T. Lue. We all know that it got to be a certain level for him to get to the point where he's not fucking speaking to you.
The kid listens to Chris Paul instead of the assistant coach, runs the wrong defensive coverage, gets absolutely cooked by his assignment, and the Clippers end up losing the game. That one possession told the whole story. The next day at practice, Jeff Van Gundy confronts CP3 directly. No ambiguity. He tells him straight up, "Maybe in other situations you've earned the freedom to tweak things on the floor, but not here. Not in this system. Not on defense." That conversation wasn't really about one blown assignment. It was about a pattern, because what Van Gundy was really saying is this: you've been doing this all season. Overriding coaching decisions. Sending mixed messages to young players. Quietly undermining the staff's authority in the locker room. And that's the moment everything clicks. That strange, cryptic Instagram post Chris Paul put up defining the word leeway suddenly makes sense. At the time, fans were confused. It felt random. In reality, it was a response. A reaction to being told, for the first time, That his voice no longer outranked the coaching staff's, Perkins then takes it a step further. After the news about CP3 broke, he says his phone started lighting up with texts from multiple former teammates of Chris Paul. Not random fans. Not media personalities. Actual players who had been in those locker rooms with him. And the tone of those messages. Let's just say they weren't surprised at all.
I've been reading, I've been listening, and it's a lot of people that have been commenting, a lot of text messages I've been receiving that said, hey, Perk, stop it now, you know CP3 ain't no saint. And these were people that actually shared a locker room with CP3.
These weren't random opinions. These were players who had actually gone to war with Chris Paul. Guys who shared locker rooms with him, who knew exactly how he operated as a teammate. And they were reaching out to Kendrick Perkins to confirm what he was saying. That alone carries weight. Perkins reinforces his point by turning to Richard Jefferson and Channing Frye, who were sitting right there with him. Both won a championship under Ty Lue in Cleveland. Both know Lue personally. Both understand how much it takes to push him to a breaking point. Ty Lue isn't emotional. He isn't fragile. He coached LeBron James. He's managed egos at the highest level. So when reports surfaced that Lue refused to speak to Chris Paul, declined meetings, and essentially iced him out for nearly 3 weeks, it forces one obvious question. What did CP3 do to make that happen? Perkins then drops a wild side story that shows just how powerful Chris Paul's reputation has been across the league, even when he wasn't trying to influence anything. After the Celtics won the 2008 championship, Ray Allen openly believed Chris Paul was the best point guard in basketball while CP3 was dominating in New Orleans. Ray went to the Celtics front office and started pushing for a trade Rondo out, Chris Paul in. Kevin Garnett and Paul Pierce shut it down immediately. No chance. Rondo wasn't going anywhere, but Ray didn't stop. Eventually, Rondo found out Allen wanted him traded for Chris Paul, and that's where the legendary beef began. According to Perkins, it escalated so badly that Ray Allen and Rajon Rondo literally put on boxing gloves and fought in the weight room. That tension never fully healed. Ray eventually left Boston to join Miami, forming a super team with LeBron, and the Celtics dynasty was effectively finished. Perkins is clear this wasn't Chris Paul's fault. CP3 didn't even know it was happening. But the story proves something important. Just the idea of bringing in Chris Paul was enough to fracture a championship core. His presence alone has the power to create division inside organizations. Now bring it back to the Clippers, and the timeline matters. Chris Paul signs with Los Angeles in the summer for roughly $3.6 million. He's 40 years old. He publicly says this will be his final season. He wants to retire as a Clipper, returning to the franchise where he spent 6 years during the Lob City era. Lawrence Frank makes the expectations crystal clear. CP3 is coming in as a backup point guard, a reserve, someone who will embrace whatever role Ty Lue asks him to play. Chris Paul agrees. Then the season starts and it goes sideways fast. The Clippers lose 14 of 16 games. The Van Gundy incident happens. Tensions rise. According to reports, Ty Lue and Chris Paul stop speaking altogether for weeks. Paul requests a meeting to address claims that he's become a negative presence in the locker room. Lue flat out refuses. No meeting. No discussion at that point, the decision is already made. The Clippers fly to Miami, get blown out, and Chris Paul plays 15 minutes, scoring 8 points. After the game, the team plane is delayed 6 hours. They don't arrive in Atlanta until around midnight. At the hotel, Lawrence Frank pulls Chris Paul aside for a private meeting that lasts 3 hours. Then, at 3 a.m., CP3 posts on Instagram, "Just found out I'm being sent home, the NBA world explodes." Fans split instantly. Some defend Chris Paul as a Hall of Famer being disrespected. Others say he brought it on himself. DeMarcus Cousins goes nuclear, blasting the Clippers organization and calling Lawrence Frank an egomaniac with short man syndrome. Cousins accuses Frank of ruining veteran careers and says he's watched it happen repeatedly. He even mocks Frank, saying they should put the little Keebler elf on a stack of books and make him speak up. But once you hear what Perkins revealed, the situation doesn't look so simple anymore. This wasn't a random act of disrespect. This was the final chapter of a breakdown that had been building all season behind closed doors.
I think the
Those
timing
females
also,
on a
Chandler.
stack of books and make them speak up.
And there was.
He didn't stop there. He also took a shot at Ty Lue, saying he was genuinely disappointed and that he'd seen Lue handle a similar situation before with Rajon Rondo. That detail made it feel less like an isolated incident and more like a pattern. Blake Griffin added his voice as well, expressing frustration with how everything played out. He reminded people that Chris Paul helped establish a winning culture with the Clippers when he and DeAndre Jordan were still young, and he criticized the lack of clear communication from both Ty Lue and Steve Ballmer. Draymond Green zoomed out and issued a warning to players across the league, essentially saying that if this could happen to Chris Paul, a future Hall of Fame point guard, it could happen to anyone. Stephen A. Smith was even more direct, calling the entire situation Bush League and flat-out disrespectful. Still, not everyone rushed to defend CP3. Austin Rivers, who actually shared a locker room with him during the Lob City era, offered a more measured perspective, saying,
If you want the truth, I've played with Chris Paul, so I know how Chris is. He ain't easy to deal with.
Rivers went a step further, explaining that while Chris Paul presents himself publicly as a smiling, family-first leader, there are plenty of former players who simply didn't enjoy playing with him. That hits differently coming from someone who actually shared a locker room with CP3. Ty Lue eventually addressed the chaos head-on at practice and pushed back hard on the reports that he and Chris weren't speaking. That ain't true, Lue said. How he gonna play and I'm not talking to him? He explained there was a stretch where Paul was going to be out of the rotation, and that was difficult for a competitor like CP3 to process. Lue added that they had a 40-minute phone call, referred to Paul as my guy and a friend, but also admitted that since the split, neither of them has reached out to the other. Things got interesting when Lue was asked why the situation couldn't be repaired. He deflected with a simple, "You gotta ask Lawrence," which reads like a partial defense of himself without denying that something clearly went wrong. Lawrence Frank then stepped in and tried to absorb the fallout. He said the decision to part ways with Chris Paul was on the organization, not the player, and emphasized that no one was blaming CP3 for the team's 5-16 start. Frank insisted it wasn't about one incident or one meeting, just that it wasn't the right fit. That explanation raises its own questions, because if everything was fine, why wasn't the fit right? As if the situation needed more fuel, a video went viral that seemed to show Chris Paul talking to Ty Lue's girlfriend outside the locker room. Social media immediately spiraled, dragging up old rumors and suggesting there was personal drama involved. The reality was far less scandalous. The woman in the video was Natalie Nakase, head coach of the Golden State Valkyries and the first Asian American head coach to win WNBA Coach of the Year. She has a decade-long history with the Clippers, and the original unedited video posted by the team itself also showed Ivica Zubac greeting her. It was a normal interaction that got distorted once an edited clip took off online. Contractual, Chris Paul is still owed $3.6 million by the Clippers. Cap rules prevented an immediate waiver, and he wasn't trade eligible until mid-December. Potential landing spots include Oklahoma City, where he mentored Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, the Lakers due to his relationship with LeBron and proximity to family, and Houston, which suddenly needs a point guard after Fred VanVleet's season-ending injury. Paul himself has stayed calm through it all. "I'm actually at peace with everything," he said, acknowledging how chaotic the last few days have been while adding that he's happy to be home and excited to finally watch his son play in person. Ty Lue, meanwhile, isn't going anywhere. He recently signed a 5-year deal worth roughly $70 million, and the Clippers have made it clear they're standing by him despite the ugly record. Lawrence Frank doubled down, saying Lue will be the coach for a long time, which confirms the organization ultimately chose Lue over Paul, so this is where it lands. Kendrick Perkins paints CP3 as a locker room disruptor who undermined coaches and whispered in players' ears, backing it up with the Jeff Van Gundy story and messages from former teammates. Lue denies the full extent of that portrayal but doesn't deny that issues existed. He won't reconcile and deflects questions about deeper problems. Chris Paul says he's at peace and hasn't directly challenged Perkins' specific claims. The Clippers insist it was about fit, not blame. Chris Paul is a first-ballot Hall of Famer who elevated every team he touched for 2 decades. He's also famously demanding and not easy to coach. That edge worked when he was 28 and carrying teams to the playoffs. At 40, in a reduced role on a struggling roster, The same leadership style may feel less like guidance and more like interference. What makes all of this so wild is the ending. One of the greatest point guards ever is watching his career close amid accusations of betrayal, a 3 a.m. dismissal, and former teammates saying he ain't no saint. Believe Kendrick Perkins or not, one thing is clear. After what's been exposed, the point guard may not be as innocent as he first appeared.